Hi, welcome to Meditate with Kate. This is Caitlin, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to read you a bedtime story. It's a story that I wrote that I call The Mysterious Adventure. So take a moment to get comfortable in your bed and relax. And take a few deep breaths just to settle in. And we'll begin the story. Amanda closed the book she was reading and with a soft sigh, tossed it onto the small table next to the overstuffed armchair in which she was curled up. The book landed with a gentle thud. She felt cozy under a fuzzy warm blanket. She had always had adventures, but only those written down on the pages of storybooks filled with magic and mystery and intrigue, and sometimes a little bit of romance. Next to her sat a giant steaming mug of comforting tea. The little tab at the end of the string was stamped with a tiny heart. She looked around the living room of her small apartment and sighed once more, even though there was no one around to hear her but her small golden dog. Penelope was a mix of a little bit of every breed. Amanda had never been on any adventures in her real life. She had never even left her small town. She was about to turn on the TV to mindlessly flick through the channels, or maybe begin watching a series where one episode would blend into another for the next few hours, when there was a knock at the door. She glanced at the owl-shaped clock on the wall. 8:05 a.m., it read. Who could it be at that time on a Sunday morning? Amanda thought grudgingly, climbing out of the comfortable chair and making her way through the living room and down the narrow hall to her front door. She opened the door and was about to say a cheery hello when she realized that there was no one there. A soft, warm breeze blew across her face and ruffled her hair as if someone was patting her softly on the head. She took a step out onto her front porch, warm spring sunshine flooding over her and into the hallway behind her. She looked to her left, up the street lined with leafy green trees, finally starting to come back to life after a long winter. There was a woman across the street with a watering can, watering a selection of brightly colored flowers that lined the pathway to her door. A man was heading towards her walking a small black spaniel, but he was still a good couple blocks away, so it couldn't have been him. Amanda looked to the right, where the street sloped down slightly and towards the sparkling blue sea in the distance. A few birds chirped and sang in the trees that lined the street heading to the water, but there was no one to be seen. What? Amanda said out loud to no one in particular. Maybe I imagined it. She shrugged and turned to go back inside and was about to close the door when something caught her eye. There, on the front porch, was a small piece of paper. She bent down and picked it up. On it was her name written in sparkly purple ink. It had fancy handwriting full of curls blossoming off most of the letters. It was a business card. The paper was thick and smooth. With growing curiosity and just a bit of trepidation, Amanda turned it over. In more curled handwriting was written the words, "You are cordially invited to," and then underneath the words was typed an address. Further under that was a date and time. She didn't recognize the address, but she gasped when she read the time, typed up in pristine ink, 10 a.m. 10 o'clock! She almost dropped the card in her haste to get back inside, to get ready to go to the address listed on the card. Normally, she would never just venture off to an unknown address listed on a curious card, but she had a feeling about this. Something was different. She got the same feeling looking at the card as she did reading her fantasy stories. Amanda bounded upstairs and into her bedroom. Soon there was a teetering pile of clothes on the bed. "What should I wear?" she said to Penelope, who was watching her expectantly and wagging the tip of her tail like a cat. She was cordially invited, but to what? Her heart began to race at the thought, but she paused and took a long, slow, deep breath. "Don't get yourself worked up, Mandy," she said to herself as she spotted her favorite top sticking out of the middle of the mountain of clothes, and spied her favorite pair of jeans draped over the chair at the desk in the corner of her room where her laptop sat. She glanced at the clock next to her bed. 9:15, it read in soft blue light. She only had an hour and 15 minutes to get to, well, wherever it was she was supposed to be going. With a quick glance in the mirror to smooth down a few frazzled stray hairs, and tucking the streak of purple hair behind her ear, she left the room and swept down the stairs. She felt a little bit like a modern-day Cinderella, but instead of a ball gown, she wore jeans and a soft gray long-sleeved top, and instead of glass slippers, her trusty sneakers that she had doodled on in a fit of creativity. Before snatching up her purse from its home on a hook next to the front door, she gave her pup Penny a little scratch on the head and a promise to be back soon. As she was walking down the street in the direction of the water, she found herself humming softly under her breath. She realized she hadn't felt this full of life in a long time. It felt like her body was fizzing with excited, nervous energy. Up ahead, she could hear a dog barking. It was a small thing trying to sound much bigger and stronger than it was. Amanda rummaged around in her bag as she approached the house, with the sign, "Beware of Dog," nailed on the fence. She tossed the little fuzzball of a creature, the dog treat she'd fished out of her bag in preparation. The little dog ate it up almost instantly, barking now forgotten, as it now smiled and wagged its fluffy tail in anticipation of more food. "I defeated the dragon," thought Amanda triumphantly as she continued on her way. She had almost reached the water when the GPS on her phone told her to turn left, down a narrow but brightly lit street, lined with colorful houses, each a different color from the next. A brilliant blue house started the row, and next to that was a soft pink, then lime green, a sunflower yellow, a couple different shades of purple, one the color of lavender, and the other a beautiful amethyst, and finally coming to an end in a warm, comforting orange that reminded Amanda of cozy nights sitting by the fire in her comfy, worn armchair. Amanda glanced at her watch. 9:30, it read. "Oh," she thought with growing excitement. "Half an hour." She looked at the map on her phone and then up ahead, her gaze lifting higher and higher as it took in the tall green hill in front of her, covered in a forest of trees that was her destination. She was about to step from the end of the road onto the path in front of her when she heard a woman shout with dismay. She glanced around and spotted a woman in a yard across the street, in front of a house the inviting color of grapefruit pink. The woman had splatters of paint the same bright colors as the houses along the street, all over her clothes. Her face had dots and streaks of pigment, and, Amanda noted, she had 2 paintbrushes stuck in her hair as makeshift hair accessories, holding together a messy bun. The woman was trying to hold onto an armful of small pots of paint as she made her way towards a canvas and easel set up in the front yard facing a colorful patch of bright flowers. A gust of wind had started up and swept down the street like an ocean wave, and the woman struggled to keep hold of all the small jars of paint. She held her paintbrushes between clenched teeth. Amanda ambled across the street, glad she had worn her trusty sneakers, and hopped over the short white picket fence, thankful it wasn't very tall, because she wasn't very athletic. She reached the woman just in time. She stretched out her hands to catch a pot of peach, a pot of fuchsia, and a pot of midnight blue paint that toppled from the woman's arms just as Amanda reached her. "Oh," the woman exclaimed as Amanda gently placed the paints on the small wooden table set up next to the canvas. "Thank you so much." Her voice was full of gratitude. "I've spent half an hour choosing the perfect colors for what I want to do," the woman explained. Amanda smiled at the woman, and the woman smiled back. Amanda felt a warmth spread through her, happy to have been there just at the right moment to help the artist rescue her precious paints. "You're welcome," Amanda grinned, happy to have helped. She glanced at her watch again. 25 minutes to go. "I'm sorry, but I have somewhere to be," she apologized and gave the woman a small wave as she headed back towards the bottom of the hill, where the road turned into dirt and quickly turned into a forest. "Well, I rescued the princess," thought Amanda as she began to climb. At first the path was gentle as it made its way through a grassy field towards the base of the hill. The sun was warm on her face, and the long grass in the field tickled her fingertips as she walked past it. She paused a moment to watch a brilliant gold butterfly alight on a bright red poppy that was swaying in the soft spring breeze. After a moment, the butterfly fluttered away towards its next flower, flying as if it was a puppet being pulled on puppeteer strings, up and down and up again. Amanda continued on towards the forest. As soon as she reached the trees, the sun disappeared and a shiver ran up her spine. She was thankful for the long sleeves of her favorite shirt that kept her warm and comfortable in the cool shade of the forest. She slowly picked her way through the branches and leaves and pine cones that littered the forest floor. She heard rustling in the bushes and the odd bird singing as she passed by, announcing her arrival to the other dwellers of the forest. There was movement to her right, and she stopped, curious. After a moment, a small brown hare appeared and hopped onto the path in front of her, ears and nose twitching, and looking towards her as if appraising her. Amanda crouched down closer to the rabbit. It twitched its ears and whiskers and then scampered off into a cluster of bushes on the opposite side of the path. From down here, closer to the ground, the forest looked different. She noticed different colors of the leaves scattered on the ground, varying shades of green and yellow. She watched a bright orange and black striped caterpillar with a furry body that made it look like some strange sort of pipe cleaner. The caterpillar undulated its way unhurried across the path in front of the tips of her shoes. She watched it move, calm and unhurried, and with unending persistence towards its destination, wherever that was. Soon Amanda realized that she'd sat down on the ground and was simply taking in everything around her. She listened to the flutter and song of a group of red-breasted robins in the trees above. She noticed a trail of studious ants that marched in a never-ending parade up a tree trunk next to her shoulder. As she sat in the quiet of the forest, she felt her breath slow as the peace of her surroundings calmed her. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath in. Inhaling the scent of wildflowers she noticed were clustered around the base of the trees. Wild roses with their delicate pink blossoms that snaked around the trunks. Pristine white snowdrops with their heads drooping ever so delicately. Vibrant purple crocus with their bright yellow centers. And the soft blue-purple of bluebells. They all reminded her of the wallpaper that used to line the head of her bed when she was a little girl, where she used to read storybooks with her grandfather. The wallpaper in her childhood bedroom was a fairyland, with beautiful fairy girls dressed in petal dresses and blossom hats. Amanda was so swept up in the sounds and smells of nature and the memories of her childhood bedroom that she entirely forgot the time. Her watch made a quiet, tinkling chime, gently reminding her of the task ahead. Slowly, as if from a dream, she opened her eyes. The forest seemed a bit different than it had before, more inviting, as if it had sprung up in her living room. She pushed herself to her feet, dusted off her jeans, and continued on her way. With her destination firmly in mind, following the red line on the map on her phone that showed her where to go, she made her way up the hill that started to feel more like a mountain. She pushed ever onward. Up ahead, Amanda could hear a low rumble, and around a tree, and then another, she came upon a river that burbled and gurgled and raced with abandon. The river cut right across the way up the mountain. Amanda looked left, and then looked right, and could see no end in sight. She couldn't go around, and she couldn't go back down. The only way was through. She paused and closed her eyes once more, taking another deep, calming breath, and letting her senses sharpen and focus, and her mind filled with peace and quiet, to allow herself to think up a solution to her predicament. My problem is a river. I need to find a way to cross it to reach the place that is written on my card with my name in sparkly purple ink, she thought. How can I do that? She peeked her eyes open and glanced up into the trees, hoping to see some vines magically appear, hanging down from the branches that she could grab and use to swing across the river like Jane and Tarzan. Alas, the branches were bare. She raised her gaze, peering up between the leaves in the trees to spots of blue sky above, hoping against hope to see a hot air balloon lazily floating past above, so that she could serenely float her way across the river in a balloon. Alas, the sky was empty. Amanda scrunched her eyes closed, as if the action would make a solution miraculously appear. She peeped one eye open, wishing upon wish that a magical golden lamp would have magicked itself into life in front of her, and she could rub it and ask the genie that would appear if he could transport her across the river with his magical powers. Alas, there was no genie lamp. Amanda sighed and her shoulders slumped. How on earth could she get across the river? She wished the world could be as full of magic and wonder as the story she read snug in her armchair at home, next to the fireplace, with her dog at her feet. Then her eyes landed on something almost as magical as vines, as a hot air balloon, and as a genie lamp. It was a pile of wooden planks, starkly bright blonde against the dark trunk of the tree that they were leaning against. There were also a few ornately curved pieces of wood in the pile, obviously the railings to a bridge that was yet to be built across the river, to connect one side to the other. Amanda's heart leapt at the sight. She grabbed one wide, heavy plank and tottered with it to the edge of the bank of the rushing river. She placed it down, and happily was surprised it reached the other side easily and solidly. She took another piece and placed it down next to the first, and then placed the final two after that, each one fitting snugly next to the one before it. It was reminiscent of the yellow brick road, Amanda thought proudly, taking in her completed bridge. The ornamental railings she left leaning against the tree, as she had no way to put them on. And in any case, she thought that someone else could do that later. Gingerly, she placed one foot on a plank, and it easily took her weight without moving. She gently placed her other foot onto another plank and grinned widely. The bridge was solid and safe. Amanda confidently strode across. In a moment, she was standing on the opposite side of the bank, and pride swelled inside her. She had vanquished the obstacle that had stood in her way. Her watch chimed gently, reminding her that the time inched ever closer to 10 a.m. She turned and continued up the hill. It seemed like she had only taken a few steps when the thick trees disappeared and she found herself in a clearing on the top of the hill. She had made it. Amanda felt like jumping for joy, and without even thinking, she did, raising her hands to the sky as if she could touch it. Ahead of her stood a large house, one that looked just like something from one of her fantasy books. It had a wide staircase leading to large double doors and was a cheery, vibrant purple. Above the doors was a large banner with the words "Grand Opening" scrawled across it in the same sparkly blue handwriting that was on the business card that had been left on Amanda's doorstep. She took a step forward and then another, and soon found herself running up the steps, taking them 2 at a time. Large windows framed either side of the double doors. She placed her hands around her eyes and peered in one of the windows. She was greeted with the most beautiful bookstore she had ever seen, with cozy reading nooks and crannies all over. There was even a large fireplace, surrounded by tiles delicately painted with beautiful pastel flowers, and topped with an ornate mantle that curled at the ends. A fire crackled softly inside. Clustered in front of the fire were a variety of large armchairs in burnt orange, leaf green, and plum purple. In the middle of the store was a large wrought iron spiral staircase leading up to a second level where Amanda could imagine all the books above. One of the doors opened silently, inviting her to enter. She slowly made her way inside. A kindly woman with gray-streaked hair, twisted into an ornate style, smiled warmly and gestured for Amanda to come on in and make herself at home. At the back of the store was a small cafe, where a young man stood, ready and waiting to prepare for customers the drinks of their choice. The man behind the counter gestured Amanda forward. Above him was a menu with the same curly-cued handwriting as was on her invitation. She chose a comforting hot beverage, and the man went to work twisting dials and pulling levers on a complicated-looking machine. Soon Amanda held in her hands a magical drink, topped high with a swirl of whipped cream, shaved chocolate, and a stick of cinnamon with which to stir it. Amanda was grateful for the drink. As she made her way to one of the armchairs by the fire, she noticed a small round table filled with an assortment of books. One in particular stood out to her. On the cover was the picture of a woman who had been on a great adventure. Amanda climbed into the giant chair with her drink and the book and curled her legs underneath her. She placed her warming drink next to her on the small wooden table. Glancing down at the book, looking at it more closely, she realized that the woman on the cover looked strangely like her. In fact, the woman even had the same purple streak in her hair that Amanda did. And instead of clothes that she thought someone on the cover of a fantasy story would be wearing, the woman in the picture wore jeans and a long-sleeved gray shirt. Amanda opened the cover, careful not to crease the spine, and breathed in the comforting scent of a brand new book, crisp paper and fresh ink. She began to read the words, but her eyes began to swim and blur as they became heavier and heavier with tiredness after her long journey. Amanda yawned, stretched, and rubbed her eyes. She noticed that a soft blanket had been placed around her, and she briefly thought about thanking the woman in the bookstore. As she moved her head back into the soft headrest of the chair, she realized that she had had an adventure after all. Amanda was sure that she noticed her name within the first few words, as she felt her eyes close and drifted off to sleep.